Evil is the profound immorality or wickedness that causes harm, suffering, or destruction. It represents actions or intentions that are morally reprehensible and a departure from good, often characterized by a disregard for the well-being of others. In this riveting episode of Gold Shields, we dive deep into the chilling enigma of Ted Bundy, a man who captivated the world with his charm while hiding a monstrous secret. As we unravel the threads of his dark legacy, we hear from his cousin, Edna Cowell Martin, who provides a unique perspective on the infamous serial killer. With a heavy heart, Edna recounts her shock and disbelief as she begins to piece together the disturbing puzzle of Bundy's life, a life marked by manipulation, deceit, and heinous crimes. In this heart-stopping interview, she reveals how an unsettling revelation forced her to confront the unthinkable. The man she once knew is responsible for a murder spree across the country. This episode promises to leave you breathless as we confront the chilling realities of evil and the complexities of family bonds. Tune in to Gold Shields.
Gold Shields brings true stories from law enforcement, the military, true crime authors, and first responders. Experience the dedication, danger, and emotional toll with the heroes themselves. These gripping tales of true crimes, true stories, and true heroes are all here on Gold Shields. Hey everyone, welcome to another great episode of Gold Shields. And surprisingly, as you see, it's just me today. Dan is actually in an undisclosed location that we're not going to talk about. He's doing something secret for the government. But the show must go on, so we don't stop doing Gold Shields. So we're going to continue today with me in the driver's seat, which is a little odd because we haven't had a separate show that we've done yet up until now. So like I said, the show goes on, Gold Shields moves on, and we are really excited about this episode. First off, want to thank our premier sponsor, Streamlight, streamlight.com. Check them out. They do a phenomenal job keeping our law enforcement officers safe in the dark, which is the most dangerous thing out there. Car stops, alleyways, abandoned buildings. Streamlight takes care of our law enforcement officers out there. The other big part of our show is Copline, copline.org. Everyone out there knows someone who needs to speak to someone about something going on in the job, in your personal life. Copline provides that. 1-800-COPLINE, 1-800-267-5463. Make sure you go to them. Reach out if you need to talk to someone. It's manned 24/7 by law enforcement officers so they know what you're talking about. All right, 1-800-COPLINE. And real quick, our new partner in our show is 221B Tactical. You saw us on our Instagram live show with them the other day with Suresh. Amazing, amazing company. 221btactical.com. Check them out there. 221 Max Dry Vest is a game changer in law enforcement. It literally is a game changer. There is nothing like being soaked in sweat while you're on patrol and can't do anything about it. And their dry fit vest eliminates all that. Makes your job a little bit easier. 221B Tactical. You're going to hear more about them on our show. For today, we have an incredible guest of a part one of a part two series on Ted Bundy. This woman is a relative of Ted Bundy. Now, the one thing I thought of introducing Edna Cowell Martin was we see serial killers in kind of one-dimensional, just the acts that they do as adults most of the time. And you forget that they had an upbringing. Even serial killers were kids. They hung out with people for the most part. They had family. And sometimes you forget that. And on today's show, we're going to bring that out. So Edna, thank you so much for joining us today on Gold Shields. I keep saying us because it's just a habit. It's me, but it's us. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to talking to you.
It's, you know what? It's a remarkable story, what you have. Because like I said, movies, books, have one view of serial killers, not their growing up. And not only is he a family member of yours, he was a friend. I mean, you guys were friends, not just kind of a family tree relative. You spent time together and hung out together. And I really want to get into that like right away. Just tell me your story and growing up with one of the most infamous serial killers of all time, Ted Bundy.
Yeah. Well, our families were really close. Ted Bundy and his mom and my parents first grew up in the Philadelphia area. So that's where they're from. And my parents came out to the Seattle, Washington area in the late 40s. And Louise Bundy, who's Ted's mom, was still back east. And she was actually my dad's niece, but they were only 4 years apart. So my dad had an older brother, Sam, the oldest sibling, and he had 3 daughters, one of which was Ted's mom. And so that's how come they were close. So when my parents moved out, my dad reached out to Louise and urged her to move out to the Seattle, Washington area and the Tacoma area, because Louise had had a child at that time, and that child was born out of wedlock, which was really kind of a big stigma back in the 40s. And my dad knew that she was struggling with that. And so he urged her to move out and come live with them until she could get her feet on the ground, create a whole new backstory about them so that she could start fresh and not be judged. And she did that. She took her 4-year-old little boy and traveled across the country and moved in with my mom and dad. And I wasn't born yet. I was born the following year. But my brother was also 4. So there were 2 4-year-olds in this little house. And she was with them for almost a year. And then she met Johnny Bundy and had 4 more kids and had created a life for herself. So we were their only relatives, 3,000 miles away from the rest of the family. We were the only relatives on the West Coast. And so we saw each other on frequent occasion, sharing family events. And my parents bought a house or a cabin actually on Puget Sound. And that's where we spent a lot of fun times on the beaches. So I grew up with him. He was 5 years older than I was, so he was kind of one of the big kids. So I played more with the littler ones at that time. But when I moved back, because we traveled a bit, and my dad was a musician, so we actually spent a lot of time in New York too, and which created my love affair with New York. I love New York and always have, because I went there as a child. And he got a job for a major university in the South and uprooted us, and we moved to the South. And I was there for 6 years, but I moved back to Seattle to finish up my junior and senior year at the University of Washington. Got an apartment in the University District just a few blocks from where Ted lived. And that's when we became really close. Get this, Tom, my parents were really relieved and happy to know that he was only a few blocks from me so that he could help keep me safe in case I needed anything. And this was exactly during the time when 8 women were attacked in the state of Washington. Only one of them survived. At least 3 of them were within walking distance of my apartment, which meant his place as well, which was just 5-minute walk away. One of them, he would have had to walk by my front door of my apartment building, cross the street, go around the corner, and that's where she was attacked. And when those things started happening, we were terrified.
Wow. I mean, you paint this picture that is incredible. I mean, it paints a picture of a movie, pretty much. I mean, yeah, it seems like a script to a movie that actually played out in real life. And so during the time that you were hanging out, this is about 75, 74, somewhere around there?
Yeah, 73 and 74. And 74 is when almost each month for like 7 months, young women and girls started disappearing.
Was there was there talk about what was going on? And did Ted participate in those conversations?
Yeah, so we hung out a lot. We were buddies. We were friends. He came over frequently to my apartment. He'd show up with a bag of groceries, which made him really popular because we were starving students. And so naturally, these conversations started coming up. We talked about a lot of things. He was squared away. He was working in politics in our state capitol. Get this, he worked for the Seattle Crime Commission, and he wrote pamphlets on crime prevention for women and even wrote one on rape prevention for women. So he worked at the Republican Convention, and I think it was 1968 or 9. So he was really active. We thought he was so cool. He had taken a summer course of Mandarin at Stanford. So he was doing all these things, and we thought, boy, this guy is going somewhere. So he's coming over to our apartment. He's telling us all these stories about what he's doing. And these things are starting to happen in our neighborhood. And so we bring them up. So I'm talking to Ted Bundy about the things that are kind of starting to freak us out. And he's very, very sympathetic and, concerned as well. Concerned. And the awful thing, I mean, there's so many awful things about this, but one of his very first victims, I think in beginning of February of 1974, was Linda Ann Healy, who happened to be a mutual acquaintance of mine and one of my roommate's best friends. They were roommates before I became roommates with her, with my buddy. And so all of us were panicked about Linda and so tuned in to that particular situation because she seemed to have disappeared off the face of the earth and nobody knew where she was, but we knew it wasn't good.
Wow. It is hard to even sit here with you and discuss this, to realize that this is happening. This isn't made up. This isn't just a book, and we'll get into your book. But it's not. I mean, this is real life and conversations that are happening. And I remember being young and in New York when Son of Sam was going on.
Oh, yeah.
And my sisters were of that age, and we lived in the city at the time, of going out, and my dad was a NYPD detective. So those conversations were going on, and the fear of don't go here, make sure you're looking behind you, all that stuff. That is a normal conversation when these things are occurring. But you're having them with the guy who's committing these crimes.
Yeah.
And that you can't make up. It's wild. And, by all your descriptions, he was charismatic, he was caring, he was funny. He was kind of in tune with the times, right? The bell bottoms, the sweaters, and just kind of, fit into that time frame, right?
Yeah, I mean, so you can imagine we're starving students, and we're scruffy, long hair, definitely bell bottoms, all that kind of stuff. He was kind of squared away. He was coming over. He looked very preppy, whereas my male friends and my boyfriend at the time, everybody had long hair. His was cut short and very put together. And as you said, preppy, wearing a sweater over his shoulders with the sleeves tied around the front. I mean, just nothing out of place at all. But I just wanted to circle back to a point you made about looking over your shoulder and your dad, having that inside knowledge from your father warning you about places. We were not hearing from the police department, right? And I didn't know right at first that a girl had been violently attacked and left for dead right around the corner for a little while. I mean, but we were starting to hear rumors from our fellow students. So we were picking up word that stuff was going on right where we lived within walking distance. And so we were getting, for me to walk to campus was about a 15-minute walk. And we were afraid to walk alone. All of a sudden, we wanted to make sure we got together in groups or got male friends to walk with us. We knew something was going on, but we didn't know exactly right at first what was happening. So it was really terrifying.
Yeah, and you think about the time frame, and we had discussed this before we actually started the show.
Mhm.
The 70s, you're not, there's no social media, there's no phones, there's no cell phones, there's no internet, there's nothing. So, I used to say that, I say this to so many people, and I said it on the show many times. If you didn't literally sit in front of a TV and watch the news at 5 or 6 o'clock, you had no idea what was going on in the world.
Exactly. And we started going out and grabbing the newspaper too, because, so we were poring over that. And just like you said, we turn on the radio too, to some of the local news stations. I mean, we were really into rock and roll, so it was really painful to get away from that. But
no matter what was going on, right?
What was going on? Yeah. but we were more and more talking about this. I worked just a half a block from my apartment, and behind it, I worked in a restaurant as a server, and it would go late, and I'd get off at night, and it would be dark. And we were hearing all these rumors of maybe a stalker, maybe somebody in the neighborhood. We were just dying for information. It got so scary because I'd have to walk up a dark alley to get to my apartment that I eventually just had to quit the job because it was too dangerous.
And yeah, and you know what? It's funny you bring that up, because that happened in New York with the Son of Sam. Same thing. Young girls quit their jobs. They stopped going to night school. They stopped, doing all that. They stopped going to clubs because that was a big rumor, that he was stalking the clubs in New York. So that, people stopped going out, which was the thing to do in 1978 and, all around there. The one question I had, just talking about was, did Ted give, I mean, it's bizarre to put it in this context. Did he give anyone suggestions on like, hey, make sure you do this, or, don't go here, anything like that?
Well, I remember having conversations with him about being careful. And I don't remember specifics, but he was very supportive about us taking care of ourselves, which is just so ironic. And having him over and talking about it frequently, he was often, knocking on our doors and wanting to visit and drop by. But here's another ironic thing. So if he wasn't over at his girlfriend's, which was about a 15-minute walk from where I lived, which incidentally is where some of the other girls were. Linda Ann Healy was only a short walk away from where he stayed with his girlfriend. He was in his rooming house nearby me. So he came over to my place quite frequently, and we always welcomed him. And only one time, because, well, anyway, I'll explain. I dropped by his place on my way and knocked on the door, and he opened up the door and he kind of stuck his head out and sort of stepped out. And I said, hey, I just thought I'd drop by and see you. And he goes, oh, well, I don't want you to come in here right now. And I was surprised. Why? He always came over to my place. Why wouldn't he let me come into his place? What was it that he didn't want me to see? And I thought that was odd, but I went, okay, because I'm a polite person. But he was always coming over to my place, and I thought that was sort of weird that he wouldn't let me come in. So afterwards, when all this came down, I had to ask myself, what is it that he didn't want me to see in his little apartment?
Right. I was just going to ask you that. Was there any way to kind of piece together, was there a victim during that time, found or anything when that confrontation happened?
So in our research, I worked with my co-author, Megan Atkinson, on this book, and we did months of research just to make sure there weren't any facts that we were missing. But in doing that, we came across the fact that he did collect things from his murders, from his victims. And I even read that he did something with their heads. I don't know. It just the thought of it, just the thought of how cruel and vicious this guy was just makes me sick. And that he would be, and I was exposing my friends to him unwittingly. Thank God none of them were victims, but it's haunted me ever since.
Sure. That's the look back thing. and completely understand that what if,
what if,
you could what if this to forever and not feel good about it. But thankfully, none of that happened. I want to ask you about one incident, moving forward a little bit. You went out dancing one night and noticed something a little different about him. He was kind of looking at the crowd a little bit more than just dancing?
Yeah, I mean, so it was probably a Thursday night, and there was this place on Shoal Bay down in Seattle, beautiful spot on the marina. And that was a go-to place where they would have sometimes live music, sometimes a DJ. And he called me up and said, "Hey, you want to go out dancing tonight?" And I love to dance. So I'm just one of these people that goes, give me an excuse to dance and I'm up. And so, going with my cousin, I thought, well, that's kind of cool. We'll just hang out together. And he picked me up in his infamous little VW bug. And we went to Shoal, which was from there about a 15-minute drive towards Puget Sound. And we got in there and the place was packed and gyrating with couples and all kinds of people. And so we kind of stake out a place and we start dancing. And I'm dancing all over the place. And he's just kind of rocking back and forth. He's not really getting into it. And I can't even get eye contact with him. And I'm kind of waving my hand in front of him saying, "Hey, I'm here. Hello. Are you having a good time?" And he just had he was just scanning the room back and forth with his jaw clenched and a very serious look on his face. And I'm thinking, this is supposed to be fun. He doesn't look like he's having a good time at all. And so in retrospect, Tom, I had to think, of course, doing this project and thinking about it, that he wasn't there. He was using me. I'm sure he was using me as an excuse to go out and check things out. And that the thought of that just makes me sick, because it was obvious that he wasn't there to dance with me. He was there for another reason.
Right. And he couldn't go alone. He couldn't go there alone because that would have been a little odd. Right. So he has you go and
yeah.
Oh, that's chilling.
Yeah, it was creepy when I look back on it. And I remember kind of shrugging my shoulders afterwards going, that's weird. I probably won't go with him again. I ended up dancing with other couples, and then I'd circle back to him and he'd still be there by himself, just kind of scanning back and forth, looking around and not looking like he was having much fun. He looked real serious.
Because it was business.
It was business. Oh,
the truthful part. It was business. It wasn't for a good time. It was business. And you wonder, you try to get into the psychological part of people like him, of, like me as a detective, thinking, all right, leading up to that, what's going through his mind? Like, okay, I need a new spot. I need to go check something out. Like building in his mind the process that I'm sure he took to go, okay, let me call Edna. We can go there. And just that process is fascinating to me, of how it was a game plan to get out in that club that night. And that's the part that fascinates me, how their minds work.
Yeah, and it's really interesting hearing it from your viewpoint, because I think you're spot on with that. That was all planned out.
Yeah, because he had to stretch out where he was, and a new target, new people, new direction. And it's just that part with looking at it from my point of view is so fascinating. We've had people on about serial killers before, and the mind part of it is always so fascinating, crazy, quote unquote crazy, to think of that. But and as weird as this sounds, not knowing it, you were probably the safest person in the world.
I think you're probably right. I think that when he was with me and family members and even my friends, because they have said that to me, that because they were my friends, they felt like maybe that was a safety shield of some kind. And, because I just was sick about the thought that I was exposing him to them. But he would wear a mask, and his mask around family members and friends was completely different. And he was very adept, very charming, very at ease with us. And he would make you feel like you were the only person in the room. And that was his weapon that he used on, young women, because he was so approachable.
And you know what? Just going off that, he had so much respect for you. It would have been, this is weird, but you're going to understand what I mean. It would have been disrespectful to you if he did anything to your friends. He would have disrespected you, which I think he, that was important to him. Your friendship and the respect he had for you, I think, was important. And if he looked or thought anything of your friends, that would have been disrespectful to you.
That's a very interesting angle to it, and I think you're right, because he did have a lot of affection for me because he'd known me since I was baby, and he was always so sweet to me and kind, and so by extension, he was really nice to my friends too. So I think that was our saving grace. But it's still just horrifying to know. And I became, of course, later very angry with him because I realized I was just a pawn in his whole twisted chess game.
Chess game. Good description. And that's what it was. So this incident happens up and around there that a young person, there's an attempted kidnapping. In and around that area, I believe. And is that the time he's first linked to something?
So I think you're referring to the very first one, which was Karen Sparks Epley, who was the young woman that just lived around the corner from me. That was the attempt, the very first one in January of 1974. And she survived it because it got interrupted. But he really did all kinds of, he attacked her viciously, amongst other things that I won't go into, but she survived it. And so that was the one that it was around the corner from me, and we didn't know for quite a while that horrible attack had happened just minutes from where we lived. So that was the first one. That's the first one that has been attributed to him. Now, Detective Robert Keppel, who was the chief detective on the case, I read his book as well, and he, I think, rightly supposes that Ted was too practiced at what he did. He was too good at it, and so he thinks that there probably were other people who were attacked and murdered before that.
Yeah, and you know what? One of the things you always hear when it comes to serial killer investigations is go back to the first incident, because that's where they make the most mistakes, because they're not pros yet. They're still amateurs on their first murder, and a lot of investigations that took place with serial killers, investigators and detectives went back to the very first crime scene, because that's where things get, they screw up a little bit. And that's interesting. So at what point, Edna, do you start putting your detective cap on? And A to B is now maybe leading to C. When does all this kind of change in your world?
Well, it wasn't until after the murders stopped in Washington State. So he went on this rampage from January through July of 1974. And the last two that we know about in July of 1974 happened on the same day at a lake, which was a summer destination spot just east of Seattle, probably a half-hour drive away. And those two girls disappeared on the same day. He kidnapped one and then came back hours later for the other. And So he came by our house not long after that. Within a day or two, he dropped by. And it happened to be on the weekend. I think it was probably a Friday or Saturday, because Don, my boyfriend at the time, who's now my husband, was up from the Tacoma area, which was about 35 miles away, and because he worked all week. And we had the newspaper right there, and there was a composite drawing, because I don't know what he was thinking, because somebody overheard him mention his name, introduce himself as Ted. So he didn't even try to use a different name. And they also saw him, he had a sling, his arm in a sling. And so he was making lots of approaches just to women to get help with the boat that he wanted on his car. And so some of them saw him walking towards this VW bug. So now they have a description of him, and they have a description of his vehicle. And so we're seeing this article in the newspaper saying someone named Ted driving a VW bug. And then they have this composite drawing of him. Now, Tom, the drawing to Don and me, didn't look anything like him. I mean, some other people claim it did. I looked at it, and I still look at it to this day. And it still doesn't look like Ted to me, the Ted that I knew. But anyway, so Ted comes over to our house. Dawn is there. And Dawn takes the paper and literally thrusts it into Ted's face and goes, "Hey, this looks just like you." Thinking, poor guy, he's, wrong place, wrong time, just being mistaken for this guy. Too bad his name's Ted. We look out the front window, and his VW is parked right in front of our house at the time. He doesn't skip a beat, Tom. He goes, "Oh, I know. Isn't this whole thing horrible? And in fact, I've been interviewed by the police, and we're just, oh my God, you're kidding me." And we're feeling so bad for him that he was. He goes, no. He says, "I want to help." He says, of course they've eliminated me. I'm not a suspect, but anything I could do to help would be great. And then he told us, he said, this is back in the time, and I don't know if you remember this, but there were VW bugs were everywhere. Volkswagen,
everywhere. They were like Hondas are today.
Yeah, they were like bugs. I mean, they were. Yeah. It was an infestation. And in the state of Washington, I looked this up. There were 40,000 VW Beetles, registered in the state of Washington alone.
Wow!
And so he threw out a statistic to us. He said, "Yeah, there's over 400 ones that are registered to somebody named Ted." And we were just like, "Oh, okay, so that makes sense why he would, be interviewed." It turns out he inflated those numbers. I think there were still quite a few with the name Ted, but it was closer to 100. So they had a list of 100 people at that point. That's pretty good to hone it down to. I'm sure as a detective. And
oh yeah.
And so we're thinking, we're a little bit uneasy, but he's reassured us at that point. So let's fast forward. He leaves shortly after that and goes to Utah because he's gotten accepted at the University of Utah Law School. He even has a letter of recommendation from the governor of our state, Dan Evans, whom he worked for on his re-election campaign, professors, other people he worked for. He had a lot of people who admired him, who wrote him letters of recommendation. So he's gone, and guess what? The murders stop in the state of Washington.
Shocking.
Yeah, shocking. We didn't make the association. And then they start up in Utah. Did we hear about those? We didn't.
In the darkest of nights, you need a light you can trust. That's why we rely on Streamlight. Whether you're investigating a scene, navigating through uncharted territory, or just need a dependable flashlight for those unexpected moments, Streamlight is your go-to source. With over 45 years of innovation, Streamlight crafts rugged, high-performance flashlights that can withstand the toughest conditions. From tactical torches for law enforcement to everyday carry lights, Streamlight has you covered. Join the Streamlight community today and see why professionals trust Streamlight for their lighting needs. Visit streamlight.com to find your perfect light. Streamlight. lighting your way through the shadows.
Introducing 221B Tactical, where innovation meets safety. Founded by a veteran police officer, 221B Tactical creates cutting-edge gear designed to keep you protected and comfortable in the toughest conditions. From the revolutionary Max Dre vest that keeps body armor users cool and dry, to high-performance gloves and tactical apparel, every product is field-tested by professionals on the front lines. Eliminate the impossible with 221B Tactical, where gear isn't just built, it's built to protect. Visit 221btactical.com and gear up today.
So
and that's what we said about the way it was back then.
That's right.
And not even just the way it was. That's another state. That's another newsreel. That's another stations. That's completely, you might as well have been in just the other side of the world. Same thing.
You may as well have been. And so those jurisdictions, as you well know, were not sharing information. And so that information didn't trickle up to us for quite a while. And meanwhile, I, the following year, in the late summer of 1975, early September, no work. It's during a recession. Here I've graduated from the University of Washington. I'm a year out, with a degree in history, really useful degree, apparently, in the job market. And so, we got to get a job. And so a group of four of us got a job up in Alaska, working out in the Aleutian Islands, 1,200 miles out to the end of the earth in the Bering Sea, packing Alaska king crab. And I get a call on the bridge, disrupting my work on the, which, believe me, I wasn't unhappy about the disruption, but I had a chill. And, anytime you get a call up on the bridge and it's shipped ashore, no phones, no newspapers, we were in a complete blackout in terms of what was going on in the world up there, out in the middle of the ocean, in the middle of nowhere. And it's a call from my brother, and it's that Ted's been arrested for an attempted kidnapping in Utah. And I just completely lose it. I mean, I'm just screaming. There's so much noise that nobody could hear me with the lines of equipment, processing equipment and stuff. But my world, that's the first time where it tipped upside down, because I go, no, that can't be possible. Not Ted. And yet, things were starting to creep into my mind, but I was pushing them away. And I just went, no, it's got to be mistaken identity. It's amazing how much you rationalize things away.
And I think that's because, I do not have a psychological degree. I just have a detective degree. But you don't want to view yourself as, oh my God, this guy's in front of me and I didn't know. You don't want to do that. And I think that's probably what you were, in the back of your mind thinking, like, all right, I'm a smart woman. I know my crap. I know my friends. I know I know all this. This psychopath is not hanging out with me and I didn't realize it.
There's a way, yeah.
Yep.
Exactly. I mean, it was just really a shocking moment, and you don't want to believe it. So it's pretty earth shattering. Yeah. So that was kind of a pivotal moment, and then something else happened. Just a week later or a couple weeks later, I forget the timeline. Maybe it was in October. I get another call to the bridge, and it's Detective Robert Keppel. So here he, it's the worst possible circumstances because, again, shipped ashore is you're talking on a radio, and anybody who's tuned into your bandwidth, and, any other bridge, any other ship, they can hear everything you're saying. So you have to do the over saying, you click and and he's trying to ask me questions. And honestly, I mean, I'm trying to help because I don't want to hinder anything, because I'm positive this still can't be possibly him, but I want to give him whatever information I can to help him in his investigation, even if it does turn out to be him. But I don't have a lot of information at that point that's helpful for him, because I can't point to specific things that I was in a separate world, like you said, he put me in a different place. He wasn't going to expose me to that. He hadn't taken that ugly mask off in front of me.
And that's I'm thinking about it just again, from my point of view. You are going to be in no state of mind to answer any of those questions. So I that call, I would not have been doing that, if that's my case. But, that is what it is. Because you're not going to be able to compute what's actually going on. And you don't know what's going on.
Well, he was talking to everybody. He talked to my roommates and it was because of the Linda Ann Healy connection. So he was trying to get, as much information as he could for anybody that was related to those cases. And I think he was starting to really, they really believed that he was also connected to the murders up here at this time. And so they were searching for any kind of connection between Utah, what was going on in Utah, and what was happening up here in the state of Washington.
Now, does he comes back to Washington at a point, doesn't he?
Yes. So he's been arrested and he's in jail in Utah for this abduction, and she escapes from him, and she remembers what he looks like. That woman was amazing what she was able to do. And so but they let him off on bail. And originally his bail was
Sounds like today, though.
Yeah. His bail, get this, Tom, it was $150,000, but they got it down to $15,000. And so the family just had to come up with what? 10% of that?
10%. Yep.
So he was out for $1,500, and our family contributed. Everybody helped his mom, Louise, pay for him to be out on bail. So he's back in Seattle at his girlfriend's. I'm just returned from Alaska, and one of the first things I want to do is talk to Ted. So we got together, and
so let's hear it.
So let me lay the groundwork for you. So I'm meeting up. So he actually contacts me. I was going to try to track him down, but he reaches out to me, and I said, "Oh, that would be great. I'm going to be in. I'm meeting up with some of my fellow soldiers from Alaska, because that was another experience working up there. And we're meeting at the Deluxe 2 cafe in the University District." I said, "You want to come along?" I said, "I can pick you up." And I had gotten this. Well, I was just in love with this car that I'd gotten, which was this Ford Squire Wagon Woody, at that time, that I still had that. Great big huge thing, but I really liked it, So I pick him up in my car, and we go to the restaurant. So we're sitting at a big round table, and he kind of scooches in next to me, and I introduce him to everybody, and we have idle talk throughout the meal, and we talk about, war stories up in Alaska, because we all feel battered from that experience. It was the tough conditions. And then one guy says, "Hey, Ted, what's your last name?" And I immediately tense up, because this is a really stressful subject in the area. Everybody's, we're all battened down and locked in our, it's hot in the summer. It was hot. Now it's winter. It's December. But even during the summer, people didn't want to open the windows if they were on the ground floor, because they were afraid of somebody coming in. But what he says, I'm Ted Bundy. And the way he said it, with pride in his voice, and he almost sat up straight and put his chest out like he was proud of it. Tom, I was horrified, because he's a little bit behind me, and I turn around and I look at him like, well, that wasn't the reaction I was expecting. And then the guy that asked him was awestruck, as if he were some kind of a rock star. And I was appalled by his reaction too. And I was looking at the young woman that was sitting right next to us and him. She pulled away from him at that point. And it was then that I went, "Oh my God, we got to get out of here." I mean, they were at the end of the meal. we finished up the bill and we left and got in the car. And I thought, okay, I gotta get some things straightened out here. So I had to do some errands. I had to run up to the university bookstore. I wish I could remember what it was I needed there, but it was a store that students love to go to. It had all kinds of stuff. And on the drive up the hill out of the university, down in that shopping center where that place was, University Village, up the hill to the University District, I decided I would ask him while I'm driving with him alone if he killed those girls that he abducted, and that if he was guilty of any of this stuff. Real smart move for,
But there's only so much you can take. You're gonna explode real soon if you just don't do that. Now, yes, I get the risk. I understand 100% what you're thinking, but you do it, right?
You do it because I wanted him to deny it, of course. And, and I'd come back from, as I said, I had lost a bunch of weight in Alaska. I barely weighed 100 pounds, 5'3". I'm just this tiny person driving my car and looking over at him and just hoping, he didn't even hesitate, Tom. He goes, "Oh, of course not. No, I did not do any of that stuff." And it's, mistake. He repeated exactly what I wanted to hear. Mistaken identity. We'll get it all cleared up. She thought I looked like somebody that attacked her, but oh gosh, I would never do anything like that. And I was so relieved. I just immediately wanted to believe him, right? So we go up to, do you want me to go on with what happens next?
Yeah, go. Okay. Yes, absolutely.
So we go up to the bookstore. There's a parking lot behind the store. We park in the parking lot. I leave him in the car. I say, "Ted, I'll just be a few minutes. I just want to grab this one thing," whatever that was. And I ran into the building and grabbed it. And I was at the cash register, and behind the cash register are floor-to-ceiling windows. And I'm bringing up my purchase, and I'm looking, and my eye is distracted by all this activity that's going on behind us down below on what they called the Ave. It's 45th Avenue. And it's the main student hangout in this little village with all the stores and the activity and a lot of stuff there. And I'm starting to get a bad feeling about what's going on. They're all pointing down to the corner. And so I go out the front door. I don't go about the back door where my car is parked. I go out the front door and I start asking people, what's going on? And they said, "I don't know. There's something going on down at the corner." And so the crowds of people are going down that way. So I'm across the street and I head down to the corner, get stopped by a light, and I see it's a big area on that corner. And there's crowds milling around, and I can't quite see what's going on. And I'm trapped by a light, and there's traffic. So it's not like you can just go against the walk sign, and the crowd parts a little bit. And in the center of that crowd is my cousin, Ted. He's left his car. He's walked over there, and he's standing there, and he almost is like he's in a trance with his arms outstretched and his head tilted back, and he's proclaiming in a really loud voice as he's slowly rotating, "I'm Ted Bundy," over and over again. And I'm just like, oh my God. So I finally make it across the street, and I have to shoulder my way through a crowd that's starting to get kind of hostile, because this is not a joke to tease about Ted Bundy. This is something that people have been really scared about and are, freaked out about what's going on in our area. And even though it's been a year without these things, people are still afraid. And I finally elbow my way to the front of the crowd, and he's still doing this. And I think all I can think is I've got to stop him. So I go right up to him, and I literally slap my hand across his mouth to shut him up. And I probably say something really nasty to him that I'm not going to repeat right here, but probably was So I grab him, and I said, "We got to go." And he willingly lets me lead him away from the corner. And I drag him back, and people are following us at kind of a distance and yelling and shaking their fists at us. And we get to the car, and I throw him in the car. And so I'm going to take him back to, I think he was staying with his girlfriend at that point. And I start driving and I go, oh my God, he did it. I was everything. That was it. Nobody would do anything like that if they were innocent. I was absolutely convinced at that moment that he had did it. He had done it. And I'm driving along and I'm going, oh my God, to myself. And then I turn and I look at him. He's just looking at me and he's smiling. It was the worst moment. And I'm going, oh God, he knows I know. And then I thought, okay, have I crossed that barrier? I didn't know if I had or not. And I started making plans what to do if he decided to attack me. And my plan was I was going to take the wheel of that car, and I was just going to crash it into whatever I could find. It was a parked car, telephone pole, I don't care. I was going to hit the accelerator and do it as hard as I could. I was going to take action. I wasn't going to let him get me. He didn't. But he just sat over there and I could just feel it and smell it. It was a terrible moment. We pulled up in front of our house. He doesn't even say a word. He opens the door and he just swings his legs out and he leaves and heads up towards the house. And I leap over and slam the door locks and just put my head on the steering wheel and just go, oh my God, I can't believe it, you know. So that was the moment.
Wow. I haven't heard an explanation like that before. I mean, that is talk about chilling, you know, and you having enough sense and enough just kind of, I guess, self-preservation not to just break down and, okay, I need to get somewhere and get him out of the car. And then the point of, you know, I'm going to crash is brilliant,
yeah.
Even to think
my
along those lines.
Ford Squire Woody wagon.
Yeah, it's all right.
Sacrifice that puppy right then and there, ready to do it.
And you know what? Bad guys, you know, don't want to get caught, whether you're a two-bit robber on the street or Ted Bundy. And the ones who figure it out and know is in danger, are in danger.
I
you
felt
certainly were.
I felt it.
Yep.
In that car, it was not good vibes that were happening. I mean, I'm getting chills right now.
Me too. We're together. I got you.
Yeah, it's one of the hardest things for me to even relive because it was such a terrifying moment.
So now at some point, we're going to jump a little ahead. This entire nightmare finally comes to an end. And, you know, now it's him. Now it's released. And the horrible body count starts to add up, and the stories and all that now come out with his arrest. I think it was in August of 1975.
Oh, well, when we met up, he'd been arrested, and that was in October of 1975, and then he was out on bail in December of 1975, and then he went on to trial. He was released to go to trial. He was convicted in Salt Lake City, and then he went off to Colorado because there were 2 women that were murdered there. And he was in jail there, and that's where he escaped. And that's how he...
Which a lot of people don't realize, don't know that.
He escaped twice.
Yeah, twice.
I mean, How does that happen?
Yep. Amazing. But they do finally get him. And he gets, you know, he gets what he deserved.
He gets what he...
Do you keep track? Were you keeping track of that trial and the trials, I should say? But because, again, we go back to what we said in the beginning. It wasn't easy. If you weren't in front of a TV or radio, you weren't. So that's why I asked, like, how much did you know about the trial?
Well, that was one of the biggest news events of the time. It blanketed every news source. Satellite beamed overseas. They set up for when he got to the execution. I mean, all the news services set up, you know, in a hotel conference room from all the news services all around the country, around the world. It was just a crazy time. So during his trial, you couldn't miss it. And yeah, it would come on the news and I would watch it and I would just shake my head. Now, don't get me wrong. I was horrified what he became, and I was mourning the loss of who I thought he was. Losing, it was like it was a death in the family, a grisly death in the family. It was a hard thing to take because I admired him so much. I had looked up to him and trusted him, and to have that completely be destroyed, it was tough. And then what he did to these young women was so horrific. To this day, there are still young women whom he murdered, whose remains have never been found, and their families haven't had the chance to put them to rest yet. I mean, this is he's still causing suffering to this day.
No, you're right. And to this day, that's exactly right. Because of so many he was suspected of, and so many he confessed to, and so many that were confirmed, the numbers just go from 0 to whatever. It's horrifying.
Well, so Tom, because of a lot of him, that's where the jurisdictions, different police jurisdictions, started to get together for these conferences to put together a system to share information. I think VICAP, is that have I called that the right thing? I mean, wasn't...
Yeah, that's one, and there's a couple others. There's just different conferences around, Southeast homicide investigations. Like there's a number of them that get together for conferences and kind of case swapping, sort of, to get other people's opinions and things like that. Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of things. I mean, if there's any good that came out of that, I suppose that the sharing information and these nationwide systems in order to, be able to look up.
Because, you have to, the technology today allows them to do that, which is what wasn't done then. And you would think, you would hope that if the technology was there, it wouldn't have been as long, there wouldn't have been as many victims. But it was the times, where information sharing wasn't a thing, or not even easy to do. You might have thought to do it, but it wasn't an easy thing to do.
Yeah. And people were, a lot of jurisdictions, they were very closed in, and they, there was a tight circle around what they did. Here's what other thing really bothers me is about his case, that they had so many people who idolized him. And when he escaped the second time from jail in Colorado, he had a lot of money on him. And someone or some people had to be getting that to him. And he was able,
Bizarre.
Yeah, he was able at that point to get on a bus, no big deal, but he got on a plane, and we did not have TSA back then. You didn't have to provide identification. You could pay cash for an airplane ticket. And that's how he ended up at the complete opposite end of the United States, in Florida. Much to the horrific, swath of destruction he left there.
Yes, that's for sure. So then you take your life experience and put it into an amazing book, Dark Tide, Growing Up with Ted Bundy. Take us through, getting it together and bringing it to life with Megan Atkinson as well. So talk about your book.
Yeah. So this was a tough subject for me, Tom. It's not something I was proud of, being, related to my cousin, Ted Bundy. And it was something that I had really avoided letting people know about for nearly 50 years. And we wanted to stay under the radar because it was a feeding frenzy by the press when all this stuff was going down. And you just didn't want anybody to know about you because they would latch on to that. And that carried us through all these decades of just trying to hide out. I just, if I had mentioned that I was related to Ted Bundy, it sabotaged our relationship. That's all people wanted to talk about. And it changed, sometimes it changed the way people would look at me. So I really kept it to myself. And keeping things and trauma to yourself, I discovered, is not necessarily a good thing. It builds up, and anybody who's been through any kind of trauma, and believe me, this is secondary to what the primary victims went through. And I don't put myself on that level at all, but it still, as a family member, was a horrific thing to be part of, and for his family, even worse. But it felt like I needed to get him out of my system, and I had a story to tell, and I thought it was important for people to hear what it was like to have someone who to have Ted Bundy as a cousin, and what it was like from a family member's perspective, and that we're real people too, and that we experienced just, what we experienced going through what he did. And can I be so crude as to hold up my book at this point?
You better.
Okay. But I mean, this is the book, Dark Tide: Growing Up with Ted Bundy. And this was really therapeutic for me to write this story. And what you've heard today is just a little part of it, but it was something that I needed to get out. And I'm so happy I did. I've heard from so many
I'm glad
people.
you did too.
Yeah, and it's the unexpected part of it is I've started hearing from a lot of people who've gone through trauma, family members, and people who are directly had trauma themselves or some kind of, crime committed against them. And they feel like they can talk to me about it. I'm really honored and humbled by that. And if I can just be someone who listens, I'm happy to do that. But there's a lot of people hurting out there,
Yep. And I think that'll work. I think you're the reason for doing it will work. And I'm so glad you did, because it's a story that, like I said in the beginning, it's a story you don't hear. No one hears about, you'll hear he was this as a kid, he was this as a kid, but the relationship that you had is unlike any other you hear. And I'm really glad you did. Where can everyone buy the book? Where can everyone get the book?
Everywhere that books are sold.
Love that. That's easy.
Yeah. My final thought is and you and I, we talked about this ahead of time somewhat, is for young women. I don't want them to live their lives freaked out. I'm an avid walker. I want them to continue doing things. But so often I come up behind a young woman who has earbuds or pods in both ears, and they cannot hear me coming up behind them. And I say, hello, hello. And they have to tear it out. And you need to have situational awareness. You need to be aware of what's going on around you, especially if you're walking in remote areas, or you're in the city, or whatever you're doing. Just pay attention and don't trust everybody. There's always multiple layers behind those masks,
Absolutely right. And everything you just said, we've mentioned on this show for the past 2 years. Situational awareness, know your surroundings, have a plan.
Check your six, look behind you, be aware of who's coming at, if you're in I go on a walk and there's a guy coming up behind me, there's nobody around, I'll cross the street, I'll put some distance just to be sure. I just be aware. Don't go off 100%. With people you don't know.
And everyone has an angle. Everyone has an angle, whether it's a hello or whether it's, hey, what are you doing tonight? Everyone has an angle, and you got to break through that.
Can you help me? I have my arm in a sling. You're a nice person. Will you help me, get this boat up on the top of my car?
Right, absolutely right.
Be careful.
Well, Edna, this has been an unbelievable hour. And I can't believe we've been doing this for an hour already. I feel like we've been doing it for 10 minutes. You are an extraordinary woman that went through something that is not the norm, and you had enough to put it out there and tell your story, which I think is even better. Who's going to play you in the movie? We'll talk about that. We'll put some feelers out, see who can. But and we make light of it, obviously, because we have to. You laugh at things, but it is an incredible story, and I'm so privileged to have you on the show to tell your story. This is one for the books.
And I also was so delighted that I was actually talking to a former detective, somebody in law enforcement who I have great respect for because of going through this. So thank you so much for for talking to me too. I appreciate it.
It was my pleasure, my 100% pleasure. And, like I said, this is part one of a part two series that we're going to be doing on Ted Bundy. And there was no better one to start it off than you. Thank you so much. Everyone out there, Dark Tide, growing up with Ted Bundy, get it on every, place you can buy books. And you all know those websites. So just go on them, support Edna, and read this amazing story. And something you don't always hear. Edna, thank you so much for joining me on Gold Shields. And to kind of just echo what you just said, this is a part of the show that we send our prayers and thoughts out to our law enforcement officers out there. Keep them in your prayers. Keep their family in your prayers. It's a hard job, and they do it wanting nothing in return, just doing it because it's the right thing to do. Pray for them. Pray for our military vets out there, their families. May everyone go home at the end of their tour safely. And like I say, see them on the street, give them a wave, say hello, pat them on the back, say thank you. And our shameless plug, www.thegoldshieldshow.com is our website. YouTube.com/@goldshields. You can watch all our shows on YouTube and every audio channel you can think of. For Edna Martin, this is Tom Smith for Gold Shields. Thanks, everyone. Stay safe. We'll see everybody soon.